Hi, and welcome to Advancement Tech. Just give me a few moments and I'll make sure that the live stream is working okay. So I hope everyone is having a great Friday. Let's get this set up here. All right, make sure that my screen is updating. So thank you for coming to Advancement Tech. We are live streaming on YouTube, so live chat is available. That's kind of the reason why I did this as a live stream, so you can ask questions. So if you want to ask questions in the chat as I'm doing the presentation, you can feel free to sign in with your YouTube account and you can chat and ask questions while I do the presentation. Okay, so this episode of Advancement Tech, episode 11, is about what are web browser cookies. So Advancement Tech provides technology information shows relevant to nonprofits, advancement, and fundraising. So welcome. Thank you for attending. First, I'm going to give a little bit of a brief background about myself. We'll have about 15 to 20 minutes of education and then a Q&A period. Okay, so who am I? My name is Creston Jameson. I worked at 2 different universities over the course of 12 years. I oversaw development services and or advancement services at those institutions during that time. Since then, I've founded a company and developed a product called Advancement Form that provides online giving and event registration for nonprofit institutions. Okay, web browser cookies. So like I normally do with these episodes, I get a definition, and this one's from Wikipedia. And it says an HTTP cookie, because cookies are related to the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, HTTP. And we did an episode on HTTPS, if you're interested in that. This is also called a web cookie, an internet cookie, a browser cookie, or simply a cookie. So it goes by a lot of terminology, but it's basically related to cookies used by your web browsers and in the communication with a web server. It's a small piece of data sent from a website and stored on the user's computer by the web browser. So all it is just contains a little bit of information, and the web server sends it to the web browser for storage. So cookies were designed to be a reliable mechanism for websites to remember stateful information. Now that's something we're going to cover is state. Basically knowing what the state of something is, or to record the user's browsing activity. So there are good uses for cookies, but there are also some uses that people consider bad or not ideal. But we're going to dig deeper into some of this explanation. So first I want to talk a little bit about state. So by default, web browsing connections and browsing the web, the connections are stateless. What that means is that there's no state maintained in your communication with a web server. You send a request, you get a response back. When you send another request again, the response you get back, it doesn't know that you're the same person. It's just saying, hey, this IP address sent a request and I'm fulfilling it. So it doesn't maintain who that is, and there's no means of identifying. You may know an IP address, but with the way the internet is designed, you could be sharing an IP address with many different computers, and it just knows how to route it back to you. So basically, a stateless request, each request made to a web server is independent of the request made before or after. So it doesn't maintain that. So there's no way to identify that the same user or browser is making the same request. Now, this is a problem if you want to handle logging in information to maintain your state or your connection when you're logging into, say, your bank account. You don't want to log into your bank account and then suddenly see some other user's information. So cookies help enable this, maintain this state, or that's one of their intended uses. So let's talk a little bit about state in cookies. So cookies allow the state to be maintained. So the web server says, hey, here, keep this information, and every request that you send back to me, send this cookie back so that I can know who I'm talking to. So the web server sends a small piece of data, a cookie, to the web browser to remember, and this cookie is sent for each subsequent request to the same web server. So that way it can identify, okay, this request came to from this particular web browser or user. So this way the web server will know it is communicating with the same user. And the example, of course, is website logins. Now, when you talk about cookies, you'll hear different terminology for different types of cookies, and I'm going to go over some of those here. So the first one is a session cookie. So these exist temporarily and are usually deleted by the browser after it's closed. Now, generally, these are used for things like logins, or even if you have a shopping cart that may maintain state, like if you have to visit numerous pages, or even an online giving process where you have to go to multiple pages, it could be maintaining state using cookies. The next type of cookie is a persistent cookie. Now, just to let you know, my chat is down here, so I look periodically to see if there's any questions. So next type of cookie is a persistent cookie. So it exists until a specific expiration date. So the web server says this cookie should last until this date. Now, this is used for longer term storage of data, or unfortunately, sometimes tracking of information. But there are some beneficial use cases for these persistent cookies to be able to, customize your experience with a website. So if you've done something and you want to come back to the state you were at, persistent cookies can help with that. The next type of cookie, now it's not a really type of cookie, but it's a flag you can set for a cookie, whether it's secure or not. That means it can only be transmitted over an HTTPS or a secure connection. So, and therefore that's, considered secure. So a lot of times, depending on the software you're using, they will use secure cookies to help ensure the security of your sessions, like particularly logins. Those should probably, they should always be using secure cookies today. The next type of cookie that you'll hear about is third-party cookies. So this is a cookie that is set as a result of a request from a site you're not visiting directly. And I'm going to show an example of this, but basically the site you are visiting asks your browser to send additional requests to other web servers, and they may ask for cookies to be set on your machine for them. So, and we're going to get into a little bit of an example about this. All right, so let's look at a visual representation of like logging in and session cookies. So on the left side here, we have your browser, and on the right side, we have the web server you're communicating with. So say you want to log in, you go to a form, so you get a form page from the web server, you put in your username and password or email and password, and you submit it. That request gets sent to the web server. And then the web server gets that information. If it says, okay, this username password is good, it sets usually a random ID in a cookie, and it doesn't have to be called ID. It could be called key or secret or something. And it sends this unique identifier in a cookie and sends it back to the browser. So now in every subsequent request the browser makes to the web server, it sends this cookie along. So sends the cookie with its request, and the web server is now able to link this browser with the person who logged in, this unique identifier. So it maintains the state of that connection. Even though there's independent requests going on, it knows it is a part of this session, essentially, this web session, because of the unique identifier that's coming in for every request. Now, when it's time to log out, generally you would click a button on a website to log out. And what the web server usually does is then tell, okay, go ahead and delete your cookie, which closes out your session. Now, another way you can usually log out of sites that are using cookies to do their session management is by closing the browser. And that usually deletes those session cookies, assuming that the web server that you're using is using session cookies for this purpose. There are sites that can use, or you can use permanent cookies for this purpose. Okay, so let's talk briefly about some other session cookie uses, and I mentioned some of these. So when you start an online store checkout, a lot of times you can do it without having to log in. And if you are visiting multiple pages through the checkout process, a lot of times session cookies are used to store information. Maybe it's the information in your shopping cart, or maybe it is a unique identifier so that the web server knows this is part of this shopping chart checkout, like checkout 5432 or something more unique than that. That's how it knows as you're going through the process and looking at numerous pages on the checkout process that it's the same user that they're talking to. Another purpose for session cookies is online giving. So typically you may go through a screen or two in an online giving process, and session cookies can be used to, again, maintain that state of that session across multiple pages. Same thing for online event registration. If you have to go through multiple pages in a process, session cookies can help maintain the session for that. It's basically any process that requires multiple pages or requests from the web server. Placing them in a session using session cookies is a way to handle that. Okay, so let's talk about third-party cookies. So let's use this example that you have your browser and you want to go to example.com. So you send a request to the web server, example.com, and you kind of consider this a first-party site. So basically, maybe this site sets a cookie, so this would be a first-party cookie, although they usually don't call them first-party cookies, but it could be a session cookie or a persistent cookie, gets set in your browser for this particular site. A third-party cookie is any other site that is on the page that's displayed where another site is contacted. So in your URL in your web browser, you're visiting example.com, but that actually may send requests to other sites, like maybe a site for images or a site for ads. Now, when it does that, and if these sites add cookies to your browser, they're considered third-party cookies. So the domain, like here's foo.com, made-up domain, foo.com and bar.com, are different than the site you're visiting. Now, some of this can be beneficial, like maybe you want images and maybe there's a reason to store a cookie from there. Whereas, and maybe the images rotate, it wants to make sure it's not going to show you the same image. So there's some things that are not too bad with third-party cookies. However, in the case delivering ads, maybe you don't want to be tracked in this way. So that's something that third-party cookies can be used for. So a third-party cookie is basically another site is setting cookies on your system that is not the site you're visiting, even though the reason why you're visiting is because that page has explicitly asked you to load content from, say, this site or this site to get images or ads or any other type of content. Okay, so let's take a look at some cookie examples at this point. So I'm looking at the site now, the site advancedinform.com. Again, this is the site where we do online giving and event management. And looking at the developer tools in the Chrome browser. So you can get this by going to More Tools and Developer Tools. And then looking at the tab Application. And then clicking on the Cookies area. And then you can click on individual cookies that are being set. Now, this should be a first-party cookie because we are visiting advancedinform.com, and these are the cookies for advancedinform.com. There's also another cookies called for a service that we're using, Drift, which does real-time chat on our website. So this would be considered third-party cookie information, but it is a service that we use to service our customers with some real-time chat if they have questions. Now, in this first-party cookie, when you go into it, you'll see the names of the different cookies that are being set here. You can actually see their values. Now, I've closed this up so you can't see the full value of my cookies here. You can see what domain they're associated with. So when you're using a cookie, the domain that set it is the only one that can read it. The web browsers assure that. So for example, we can see this cookie will only work with the www.advancementforum.com domain. And also there are some other cookies that are set higher in the domain level. So any site at advancementforum.com can read these cookies. So it could be mail.advancementforum.com or ftp.advancementforum.com. You can see a particular path, and then you can see that most of these are persistent cookies. If this was a session cookie, you wouldn't see any expiration here. And it gives some indication of the size and whether it's secure or not. And you can actually look at some of this or Google them to find out what these different session cookies are for. So for example, FBP has to do with a Facebook pixel. We have Google Analytics here. Again, this is related to Drift. This is related to Add This, which is a sharing widget for content that we post up. So you can take a look at your own site and see what cookies you have and what's going on, or even visit other sites to get a little bit more information about cookies in general. Okay, so jump back into the presentation. Okay, so when you talk about cookies, a lot of times you're going to talk about some security and privacy information. So one thing that I just mentioned previously is that web servers can only read cookies for their domain. So you can't visit, like if advancementforum.com sets a cookie in your browser and then you visit example.com, example.com can't read that cookie because this cookie is associated with the advancementforum.com domain. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, another thing to think about with regard to cookies is that privacy regulations, such as things like GDPR, are starting to require a cookie policy and may require user consent for setting cookies and doing certain things. So that's something to keep in mind with cookies, is that as more privacy regulations are brought about, because they have a means of tracking users, you may need to provide at some point notifications that you're using cookies and for what purpose. Two other terminologies that kind of come up with regard to cookies are, one is a super cookie. What's a super cookie? So because of what I said, that a cookie is associated with a domain, a super cookie is a really high-level domain cookie. Like if someone set a domain to be .com, that means any site in .com, like apple.com can read it, microsoft.com could read it, google.com could read it. So most browsers can ignore and will ignore these super cookies because it's kind of a means of tracking someone in a lot of different domains. So just for completeness, that's kind of what a super cookie is. And then you also have this concept of zombie cookies, where you go in to delete a cookie and then suddenly it comes back with the same value it had before. Now that's done because other than cookies, there are some other ways that a web server can request a web browser to store information. In some sites, you can debate whether it's malicious or not, can actually store some cookie information in another means on the web browser. And if you happen to delete that cookie, sometimes when they reset it back, they can use these other storage mechanisms to be able to put that information in there. So the zombie cookie comes back as it was before. All right, so that kind of covers what are web browser cookies. At this point, generally ask questions to see if anyone has any questions about any of the content presented. And while I wait and check the chat to see if there's anything, we do have upcoming shows. We present Advancement Tech on Fridays at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we're always looking for new episodes with what technology topic as it relates to fundraising, nonprofits, or advancement would be interested in seeing. So again, the next show is on April 12th at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we are looking for your suggestions as to what the content should be coming up. All right, I don't see any questions in the chat at this time. So if you want to get notifications of future episodes, the best place to go is advtech.tv. There you can put in your email address and we'll send you essentially a once a week email that gives you notifications of what episode happened, the replay of it, as well as the plans for the upcoming episode. Alternatively, we're also looking to grow our YouTube audience, so we would appreciate it if you could give us a subscribe as well as like for this video. That would be great with us helping to grow the audience for this content, this show that's produced weekly. Okay, I don't see any other questions in the chat, so we will close that out. I hope you have a great Friday and a great weekend, and I will see you next Friday.